The best way to predict your future is to create it. This is a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, who is a central figure in the story of Juneteenth.
Futurist, gentlemen! The futurist is here! He sees all. He knows what's best for you, whether you like it or not. Give me a break, Barton.
Hi, I'm the independent futurist. I study and tell stories about the future. Unfortunately, I do not know all. What I do know is that we must learn from our past and understand our present so that we are equipped to imagine, create, and move toward better futures for ourselves. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. To understand Juneteenth, we must first talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. The proclamation only applied to the states that had seceded from the United States, leaving slavery intact in the loyal border states and exempting parts of the Confederacy that were already under Northern control. The so-called freedom that the proclamation issued was dependent on a Union military victory. Without military intervention, slavery continued in Texas for over 2 more years, until June 19, 1865, when 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to enforce freedom in the state. More than 250,000 black people had remained enslaved in the state after the Emancipation Proclamation. Texas was the last state in the Confederacy where slavery was abolished. This day became known as Juneteenth. The word Juneteenth is a portmanteau of the month June and the date the 19th. June 19, 1865 was still just another way station on the road to the end of slavery in the United States. Freedom was unsurprisingly still snatched from the hands of many black Americans, with the Galveston mayor forcing many enslaved peoples to continue to work by threat. Some, now former slaves who attempted to act on their already long-delayed freedom, were hung and/or shot. Texas plantation owners delayed the news or waited until a government official showed up to enforce the law. The end of slavery was ultimately a long process that required military enforcement. Because the Emancipation Proclamation also allowed black men to serve in the Union Army and Navy, the oppressed liberated themselves. Almost 200,000 black soldiers and sailors fought in the war. Slavery was not abolished officially until the 13th Amendment's ratification on December 6, 1865. Even after being legally freed, formerly enslaved people faced immense challenges with no wealth, property, or social mobility. Many were forced to continue working for former slave owners as slaves, or through exploitative forms of pseudo-slavery like sharecropping. A black Texas woman named Katie Darling was forced to continue working for her white master for another 6 years after the Juneteenth Declaration in 1865. Nonetheless, as always, there's room for black joy in the midst of immense suffering. Juneteenth has been celebrated by black communities since June 19, 1866. Early Juneteenth celebrations centered around the church because black Americans were restricted from accessing many public spaces. The prevalence of Juneteenth celebrations has ebbed and flowed over time. Celebrations were on the decline in the 1940s during the World War II era, but saw a resurgence in the 1950s. There was a decline in celebrations in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, but Texas advocates started putting pressure on the state to formally recognize the holiday in the 1970s, marking another uptick in observation of Juneteenth among black Americans. The Texas legislature eventually passed a bill declaring Juneteenth a state holiday on June 7, 1979. The first version of the Juneteenth flag was created in 1997 by activist Ben Haith. Calls for Juneteenth to be made a federal holiday rang out after the murder of George Floyd, a black man, at the hands of Derek Chauvin, a white police officer, was filmed and went viral on May 25, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Juneteenth became a national holiday on June 17, 2021, when President Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. It was the first new federal holiday adopted since Martin Luther King Jr. Day in 1983.
I've only been president for several months, but I think this will go down for me as one of the greatest honors I will have had as president, not because I did it, you did it, Democrats and Republicans, but it's an enormous, enormous honor.
Juneteenth highlights that the path to true freedom and equality was far from straightforward, and justice was frequently delayed and denied. Juneteenth teaches us that legal declarations of freedom do not always translate into tangible gains for Black people. Black Americans currently face a similar paradox: progress on paper and continued injustice in reality. Juneteenth represents a second Independence Day in America, and forces Americans to reckon with the ways in which our country failed and continues to fail to fulfill its promises for Black Americans. While Juneteenth is now a national holiday, the support for Juneteenth is far from widespread. Unsurprisingly, opinions are split along racial and political lines. That could at this point be the national tagline, America, split along racial and political lines since 1619. While the Senate unanimously approved the Juneteenth holiday, 14 House Republicans voted against the bill. The 14 Republicans who voted no expressed concerns over the name of the holiday, which is sometimes referred to as Juneteenth Independence Day. They say it competes with Independence Day on July 4th. They disingenuously claim that Juneteenth will force Americans to choose which Independence Day to celebrate based on their race. Despite conservative claims, acknowledging historical racism for Black Americans is not divisive. Nobody is telling white people to make a choice. The 14 members were from Arizona, California, Georgia, Kentucky, Montana, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Wisconsin, and last but certainly not least, Alabama. The Alabama House of Representatives passed a bill in 2024 that designates Juneteenth as a new state holiday. However, rather than closing state offices for Juneteenth, the bill forces state employees to choose to take off either Juneteenth or the existing state holiday for Jefferson Davis's birthday in June. In case you aren't aware, Davis was the president of the Confederacy. Are any conservatives angry about Americans actually having to choose between those two holidays? This perfectly encapsulates the fact that we tend to, as a country, favor empty symbolic gestures that suggest some semblance of racial harmony rather than truly taking accountability for our history in pursuit of a better future. As long as we continue to cling to relics of our racist past, we cannot truly move forward. We should throw out all those old moldy statues of racists and instead erect statues of champions and advocates for racial justice. Obviously, I'm thinking about Kendall Jenner. Remember when she partnered with Pepsi to solve racism? Anyway, Pepsi would unfortunately not be the last corporation to try to tackle racism and sell you something at the same time. The response from corporations in 2021 to the new shiny holiday was to stock those store shelves with some new shiny products. You can find Juneteenth branded apparel, jewelry, games, food, and more. You can even buy Juneteenth yarn. This commercialization over time threatens to obscure and distort the purpose of the holiday altogether. Walmart in 2022 was publicly criticized for selling what they called Celebration Edition Juneteenth ice cream. Social media users pushed back and encouraged people to buy from a Black-owned ice cream shop on Juneteenth instead. While cementing Juneteenth as a national holiday is progress, the implications on Black American lives are only surface deep. Let's be real for a second. Was there really a racial reckoning in 2020? I mean, I was breathlessly informed by every news outlet that there was. Like, we promised the racism is finally over, guys, you can come out now. But I recall many of those same people claiming that Barack Obama's historic election in 2008 signaled real change. And we all know how that turned out. Racial justice would require self-awareness, honesty, and accountability on a national scale. But the toxic tide of misinformation and disinformation in the media rises and reaches new heights every year. There's truly no telling whether rising sea levels or our own relentless gullibility is going to consume us first. So in terms of a hope for a real racial reckoning, I won't hold my breath. Or maybe I should, because I still don't know how to swim. Speaking of swimming, national nonprofit Outdoor Afro is using Juneteenth as a vehicle to encourage Black Americans to find joy in exploring the natural world. The organization's 2024 Juneteenth commemoration theme is freedom to access water. The challenge is to spend 2.5 hours on June 19th this year at a water site of your choice. The 2.5 hours represents the number of years it took for News of Freedom to reach Texas. This commemoration is a part of the organization's Making Waves program, which they launched in 2019 to address the fact that Black children are more likely to drown in pools than white children as a result of historic prohibition of access to beaches and public pools for Black Americans. This is likely how I will be spending my Juneteenth. Initiatives like those by Outdoor Afro propose joyful ways to celebrate the day that also honor the meaning and history behind it. It acknowledges both how far we have come and how far we still have to go. In contrast to the capitalistic overtures of corporations trying to take advantage of the fact that Black people buy things too, some Black folks are using Juneteenth to encourage conversations about the racial wealth gap. This gap has remained persistent despite racial progress. Black households tend to have less than a quarter of the wealth that white households have on average, making Black people more vulnerable to financial risk and less economically mobile. In response to these startling facts, there are Black influencers using their platforms to teach people about investing and entrepreneurship with an eye toward the future. Generational wealth in many ways is the key toward unlocking sustainable racial uplift for ourselves and for our children. Ultimately, we need more than targeted marketing campaigns for Black people. We need to take steps to tangibly improve Black lives socially, legally, and economically. The 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder just occurred mere weeks ago on May 25th. Democratic Representative Sheila Jackson in Texas reintroduced the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that same week. The bill was first introduced by Karen Bass in 2021, at the time passing in the House led by Democrats but stalled by Republicans in the Senate. The bill would result in changes to policing that would benefit all Americans and Black Americans in particular, who are still killed by police more than other groups. If passed, it would limit the use of force and qualified immunity as a defense to liability in civil suits, and restrict no-knock warrants, carotid holds, and chokeholds. This would actually save lives, so obviously we can't have that. Years after our supposed national racial reckoning, we are still fighting for common-sense police reform. That is unacceptable.
We are fighting for is equal access to exist as ourselves. What we are fighting for is to undo 400 years of being brutalized, victimized, surveilled, enslaved, imprisoned, and having the life joked out of us in the cities we call home. We will continue to fight for change until we achieve a better future.
When discussing future possibilities, it is important to think about the future as manifold or multiplicitous. In other words, the future has many faces. Because it is not possible to actually predict the future, this forecast includes multiple possible versions of the future, though none of them will likely occur exactly as I've conceived them. Forecasts are stories about potential futures. A set of potential futures is more likely to capture the essence of the actual future than a singular prediction, given the inherent uncertainty of how events will unfold and the unpredictability of human behavior. So what are the possible futures that could occur? Let's think about the future in the year 2035. As Black folks increasingly push back against commercialization and commodification of our history, a picture of a radical future starts to emerge. This is a future in which Juneteenth is defined not by the drunken, ahistorical revelry associated with most other American holidays, but is instead defined by community-led systems change. In this future, there are widespread racial justice advancements due to investment of time, talent, and dollars in Black communities. Service and activism fuel the Juneteenth holiday. This is a future defined by growth, progress, and transformation. Juneteenth in this future has become integrated into society writ large. It is no longer a holiday that is primarily observed by Black Americans. The culture war in the classroom has calmed, and instruction on Juneteenth is a regular part of the national education curriculum in public schools. Companies have near universally recognized Juneteenth as a paid holiday, and workers are encouraged to and supported in celebrating the day in meaningful ways. Given the conservative pushback against making Juneteenth a federal holiday, it is also very possible that we will find ourselves in a retrograde future where knowledge of and respect for the holiday is low. Failed presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy would be happy to live in this future.
Do you think Juneteenth is a useless holiday?
I basically do.
Other conservatives in the present, unfortunately, also have had a lot to say about the holiday, including Candace Owens, a right-wing grifter and political commentator cosplaying as a black woman. She has slammed Juneteenth multiple times, calling it ghetto and lame. Though Candace Owens and the Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro are now at odds, to put it mildly, they both seem to hold similar contempt for Juneteenth. Shapiro, a sentient poop stain on your underwear, recently scoffed at the idea of honoring black Americans on this day on Twitter by stating that we have white people to thank for Juneteenth. Donald Trump agrees. Well, he believes that he specifically as a white person deserves credit for Juneteenth. We are somehow living in a terrible deja vu reality where we have to choose between a rock and hell once again in the next election. Trump, in one of his many vain attempts to pretend like he's not a racist, seemingly supported Juneteenth during his presidency, but his actions told a different story. In 2020, Trump got into hot water when he decided to schedule his first rally since the start of the pandemic on Juneteenth, eventually pushing it to June 20. Trump, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, cited the controversy, stating that it ultimately brought attention to Juneteenth. Trump said, "I did something good. I made Juneteenth very famous. It's actually an important event, an important time, but nobody had ever heard of it." In this same interview, when Trump asked an aide if they had heard of Juneteenth, they informed Trump that the White House had actually issued a statement commemorating Juneteenth in 2017, 2018, and 2019. Yikes. As history has shown us, Republicans do not support the holiday, but could Juneteenth be safe even in Trump's tiny Republican hands? Frankly, I doubt it. Trump has shown us over and over again that he doesn't seem to have any deeply held beliefs, save for the belief in his own eminence. He's a desperate pick-me. He's easily influenced by his base because at the end of the day, he just wants to be adored. If it appeased his base to go after Juneteenth, I believe he would reverse course without hesitation. Politically charged backlash could result in workplace bans of Juneteenth celebrations in the future. In a retrograde future, disempowerment of black communities is the norm. Black history is not represented in the classroom, the power of diversity in the workplace is discounted, and black representation in the media worsens as black experiences and perspectives are continuously demonized. What the truth of the future will look like probably lies somewhere in the middle. In a realistic future, Juneteenth celebrations continue to largely consist of shallow celebrations removed from their full historical context and rooted in capitalism.
Oh, hi. I had a question about the Juneteenth Free at Last sale.
Yes.
Well, it says here on the coupon that everything is free. Like, free?
Free.
Okay.
With 3 valid forms of ID.
3 valid forms of ID. Okay then. Driver's license, passport, library card? What are you doing?
Just making sure you meet the minimum height requirements.
What? Is it Six Flags? Like, what is going on?
Name?
Evelyn.
Moon sign?
That's kind of personal.
Scorpio. Okay, well, just fill out these forms.
The coupon just said free. Why do I gotta jump through all these hoops?
Just one.
The ideological divide along political and racial lines on the value of the holiday continues, with few signs of eventual unity. So, more of the status quo. In this future, conservatives continue to mock Juneteenth and call for its social and cultural cancellation. Meanwhile, local celebrations are routinely actually canceled. This is a phenomenon that is starting to emerge in the present. The 2024 annual Lamert Park Juneteenth Festival in South Los Angeles has been canceled by the organizers until next year. The organizers cited lack of enough funds to safely host an event that attracts tens of thousands of people. The growth of the festival over time has been difficult to manage. Insurance coverage, security, and city permits are all more expensive than they were last year. Organizers were informed that as a safety measure, they had to move the live entertainment stages from the planned venue, and they did not have time to make this adjustment. In Akron, Ohio, the 2024 annual Akron Juneteenth celebration was also canceled this time by the city of Akron. This move came as a surprise to one organizer, Fayla Sutton, who stated that she was distraught by the decision. She had already paid for the event before she was informed of the city's choice to cancel. The Akron mayor announced just days ago that all events on city-owned property were canceled, including all Juneteenth celebrations. The mayor was motivated by a letter from a majority of Akron City Council members who believe that city-sanctioned events are too dangerous following a shooting on June 2nd. Organizers begged to differ, insisting that security was not an issue at their planned events. They also questioned why the city decided to make this decision right before the scheduled events instead of weeks earlier, giving organizers and vendors little time to react or respond. The organizer Sutton had this to say: "You face these problems that we have in our city by coming together, and we've been prevented from coming together this year. For many local black leaders, this is a transparent political attack using racial stereotypes about black propensity to violence to prevent Juneteenth celebrations." Motivations for canceling Juneteenth events in other cities are less clear. An event in Michigan will no longer happen due to unforeseen circumstances, and an event in Tennessee was canceled due to personal reasons. In a realistic future, due to a lack of sustainable funding and worsening political polarization, Juneteenth events will continue to be under threat. Ultimately, it's up to us to decide which direction we'd like to go in. We do not have control over the future or what other people do, but we can better prepare ourselves for all that might happen, and we can even shape what happens if we dare to believe in our own personal power. Thank you so much for listening. Please share your thoughts, reactions, and reflections in the comments. I'd love to know if one or more futures stands out to you. When you think about the future of the Juneteenth holiday, what comes to mind? Thank you again for being here. In my videos, I explore what might happen in the future based on our past and present. I also explore how we can all be a part of making the future we want happen. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Until next time.